Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
In a drastic but not unexpected move, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has moved towards scrapping Article 370, which grants special status to Jammu and Kashmir. The government has also bifurcated the state into the Union Territory of Ladakh and the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, except that the UT of J&K will have a state assembly. Now, in this edition of Government Matters, what we are going to look at purely is the legal aspect of what the government has proposed and how does the government weigh in as far as the legality of it is concerned. Given how huge this development has been, I have with me not one but two in-house legal experts today, Apurva Mandhani and Debayan Roy, and both of them will help us decode the government's move. To begin with you, Apurva, just to tell our viewers, what does the presidential order state?
Ruhi, presidential order makes certain amendments to the constitution as well. Essentially, firstly, it supersedes the 1954 order, which had introduced Article 35A, which provides a special treatment to the permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir. That's one amendment. Of course, that means that Article 35A has been scrapped. Certain amendments have been made to Article 367 as well, which are cosmetic changes to change the terminologies involved. Another important amendment is to Article 370 subclause 3. Now, Article 370 subclause 3 has actually been a major bone of contention whenever talks about Article 370 have happened within the houses or have gone before the courts, because this article provided that the temporary provision, which was Article 370, could be declared inoperative by a presidential order, but it made it necessary, and the constitution uses that word, for the president to take the recommendation of the constituent assembly of the state to bring in such amendment. Now what this order does is it removes constituent assembly and substitutes it with state legislature. So essentially this paves the road for declaring Article 370 as inoperative.
So Debayan, Apurva has just explained to us what the presidential order states, but just to, in very simple terms, to tell our viewers technically, does it mean that as of now Article 370 stands revoked, or are there further steps involved?
So as Apurva just correctly pointed out, that as of now Article 370 has not been abrogated by this presidential order. Essentially, the amendment that this presidential order tries to bring about is to Article 370 Clause 3 of the Act of the Constitution of India, where it says that the Constituent Assembly of the state will be replaced with Legislative Assembly of the state. And now this particular amendment will be used by the government in the future to repeal or abrogate Article 370, because when we talk about the bill, the Jammu and Kashmir reorganisation bill, it says that Jammu and Kashmir, the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, will be with a separate state legislature, and this legislature will be the one which will have to give its recommendation to the president before he puts out an order to repeal Article 370. So this is the first step towards revocation or abrogation of Article 370.
So there is still a process going ahead.
Yes, of course. The founding stones have been laid as of now.
Apurva, I'm sure this matter has come up before the court, the Supreme Court, as well as various high courts in the past. So can you just run us through what the courts have said, whether they've upheld the article, or what has happened?
Ruhi, very briefly, actually the question has come up whether in passing or wherever the provisions have been challenged, because like I mentioned, Article 370, the Constitution calls it a temporary provision. Correct. So of course, several citizens have been, have taken it to the court demanding that the provision being temporary be scrapped or some groundwork for it be laid. But the courts have time and again declared it a permanent provision, or have clarified that under Article 373, it can be declared inoperative only with the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly. So like I mentioned earlier, this seems like laying the groundwork for this.
Debayan, coming back to you, so a lot of people have said that Article 370 is what is the link between Jammu and Kashmir and India. Now with Article 370, once it's abrogated, What does it mean about that link, and what safeguard has the government used to ensure the link remains?
So basically, there was always this perception that what ties Jammu and Kashmir to India is Article 370, because by that, it's only matters of foreign affairs, defense and communications that are looked at by the government of India for Jammu and Kashmir. But apart from that, they have their own Constitution of India, which they had brought about in 1956, if I'm not wrong. And through that Constitution and their legislative assemblies, etc., they had their own laws, whether it be inheritance, properties, etc. But now, by this presidential order, the government has extended the Constitution of India to the state of Jammu and Kashmir by making it a union territory like that of Delhi or Puducherry.
Right.
So,
which will have a state assembly, which will
yes,
have state
absolutely.
elections.
So, we can look at it from this point of view, that on one hand, they have taken the first steps to abrogate Article 370 and also scrap 35A. But on the other hand, they have brought about the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganisation of States Bill 2019, by which they are now making it a union territory as a permanent part of the country, like the other UTs we were speaking about. So I don't think there is any loophole that the government has.
So it's been a two-pronged process.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Apurva, there has been a lot of confusion about what this entire process entails, because it requires a constitutional amendment. So can you tell us how a constitutional amendment can be brought about and where this fits in?
So Ruhi, there are two aspects to this. Of course, if we talk about a constitutional amendment, it would have been brought under Article 368 of the Constitution of India, which would have required two-third majorities approval in both the houses, plus ratification by 50% of the states.
Right.
Now, whether such an amendment can be brought in the first place is another issue that needs to be considered. Because according to the Supreme Court judgment in KESAVANAND Bharti case, the basic structure of the constitution cannot be amended at all. It cannot be touched. So whether this provision comes under the basic structure of the constitution is another question that could, perhaps come up for judicial review.
Right. Now, it's a move that is hugely contentious. It's been preceded by days of uncertainty in Jammu and Kashmir. We know since last night, mainstream leaders like Umar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti have been placed under house arrest. In fact, politically, it's going to be a very, very sensitive move for the government. But of course, the government has tested waters, and just to tell our viewers that in the past couple of weeks, they've managed to pass some very difficult bills, whether it's a triple talaq bill, the RTI amendment bill, or the UAPA bill in the Rajya Sabha as well, which has been a weakness for the government in the previous term. So clearly, politically, the government is confident of passing it through, but of course, it will have backlash. But talking about it legally, as I mentioned, that we'll restrict this to a legal conversation, both of you weigh in on this because we're going to close after this. Can it be challenged in a court of law?
So, I'll talk about the first constitutional expert we spoke to. Maybe Apurva can take it forward from there. So, the former Secretary General of the 14th Lok Sabha and the 15th Lok Sabha, PDT Acharya, very clearly says that this presidential order is null and void. He says that this is null and void only because if we are talking about changing a text of the constitution, even if it's the or an, even then a constitutional amendment bill has to be brought about. Here we are talking about changing a particular line in the constitution by which we substitute constituent assembly with the legislative assembly. In such a situation, bringing about a constitutional amendment bill is imperative on part of the government. After such a bill is brought about, it needs to be debated in both the house, passed, ratified by 50% of the states, and then a presidential notification comes to give effect to this particular change, and then a presidential order could be brought about saying that this change has been formalized through a bill. So it is this legal process which would give, today we are talking about Article 35A being scrapped, we are talking about Article 370 foundation stones being laid to be scrapped. So this particular thing has to be there before the presidential order for this to take place. But he also mentions that Article 35A was brought through a presidential order. So if that's the way to bring a particular article, that should be the only way to get away with it. But if we are speaking legally, then we are talking about changing the text of the constitution. And when we talk about changing the text of the constitution, there is no other way apart from the constitutional amendment bill. But there's another
which has to come
expert,
to Parliament.
yeah, who has completely disagreed with this view. So I think Apurva will.
Yeah.
Apurva, why don't you tell us about
Yeah,
that?
sure. So we spoke to Professor Faizan Mustafa, who is an academician and a constitutional expert. What he was of the view that what this order does is extends the Constitution of India to the state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Right.
Now, like Debayan mentioned, this has been done before. And the government is now going by precedent, so to say, right? Because the 1954 order, it was issued in a similar manner.
Sure.
Now, just to clarify for our viewers that the order has been brought under Article 370 itself.
Right.
So what the government is actually doing, they've played it smartly, they're using Article 370 itself to bring in an amendment to Article 370.
Right.
They're using Article 370 Clause 1, Subclause D, which allows the President through an order to alter how much of the constitution can be applicable to the state.
Right.
And now what they've done is basically
Extended it fully. Right.
Extended fully, correct.
Right.
So what Mr. Mustafa, was of the opinion that that's all they've done, and since this has been done before, Article 35A, which was also a constitutional amendment, right? It was included in the constitution,
Right.
was brought in through a presidential order. Going by precedent, this can be done again, and this is all that they've done.
Right. Well, we know since the morning you've been hearing about the government's big move, but did you really know the legal aspects of it? If not, don't forget to watch this episode with Debayan and Apurva, who've really explained it to us threadbare, and also log on to theprint.in to read their story where they've done this explainer as well. Thank you for watching Government Matters.